Welcome to Life and Liberty Radio with David Householder. I'm Josh Jose, and together, you and I are taking another step toward freedom, both spiritual and political. So get comfortable, breathe in, and ignite your imagination. Envision a society that is spiritually deep and truly free. It's easy if you try.
One of the defining issues of our time, of course, is the abortion debate. And there's left-wing versus right-wing, pro-choice versus pro-life. And it seems like a trench warfare, World War I situation where people are dug in, convinced of their side and their position. And most of the pro-choice people would describe themselves as liberal. Most of the pro-life people would describe themselves as conservative. And an overwhelming majority of evangelical Christians would consider themselves pro-life. And we know the debate, we know the script, we know the lines, and we know the boundaries of it. And it's a very heated and passionate debate, but I'd like to reframe the question. So rather than left versus right, secular versus Christian, whether it's pro-choice versus pro-life, let's reframe this a little bit. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I am a libertarian. And libertarians often ask me, what should we do about the abortion debate? Because they know I've been active in the debate. And I think that the libertarians have a lot to add to the argument, and it might surprise you. You might think, well, hey, libertarians would all be pro-choice because libertarians like freedom of choice, and the most free option here seems like it would be the pro-choice option, because who would you be to tell somebody what they can or can't do? Libertarians, after all, are generally against the criminalization of drugs. They're generally for freedom within your home. They're against snooping. They're against drones. They're against foreign wars that have nothing to do with our security, those kinds of things. So wouldn't libertarians naturally be pro-choice? Well, let's just assume for a moment that libertarians have an entirely different perspective to bring to this. And I think it's about time we bring a third perspective to this debate. I'd like to start with the grisly news from Kermit Gosnell's abortion clinic in Pennsylvania. We've all heard about that on the news. And virtually everyone, Republican, Democrat, left, right, pro-choice, pro-life, people see this as grisly, as awful, and universally Kermit Gosnell is thought of as a moral and ethical monster. This is not one of those debatable issues. He was breaking rather liberal abortion laws all the time, doing what we call late-term abortions, where you have to take huge measures to kill the unborn baby because the unborn baby is easily viable at that point. And these late-term abortions, if they were described, would turn your stomach no matter where you are on the political spectrum. And so the reason I'm starting with that is not to say that all abortion is like Kermit Gosnell's abortion mill, certainly not. But I would like to use this as an example of moral outrage that goes beyond politicizing the abortion issue. And so let's look at this from a libertarian perspective. The libertarian perspective, morally, if we take the abortion issue out of this, has to do with non-coercion. The central concept in liberty thinking is that you can do whatever you want as long as you don't aggress against someone else. If you don't aggress against his or her person or take his or her things, theft and initiating aggression are no-go for libertarians. So, in other words, you might think, well, why should libertarians be against gun control then? They should be against guns. Well, no, libertarians are against gun control because they believe that you have the right to defend yourself, but you don't have the right to initiate aggression. In other words, you can shoot back, but you can't start the fight. You can have a gun in your house, but you have no right to go to your neighbor's house with your gun and try to get rid of your neighbor's gun because he might hurt you. You can't do a preemptive strike, in other words, if you're a libertarian. Now, there's pacifist libertarians who believe that you don't fight back at all, and there's self-defense libertarians who say you have the right to shoot back. But all libertarians agree that you don't initiate coercion, which is why libertarians don't like taxes, because they are coercive, and if you don't give them, they will punish you physically. They'll put you in jail, take you there, and you won't be able to get out. And so the Founding Fathers were very liberty-oriented, and the whole idea of give me liberty or give me death, that we didn't want to be feudalists. We didn't want to have a lord of the manor ruling over us as serfs, and they would protect us, take care of us, educate us, and all those kinds of things, and we would give our fealty to the feudal lord. And the Founding Fathers thought, no, let's have a different kind of society here. Let's not be feudalists. Let's not have Sir this and Sir that, and Count this and Countess that, and Baron this and Baroness that. Let's have a free society here where all men are created equal, and it took us quite a while to live into that. We're still working on that, but it's an ideal worth living into. And the idea is that what you do on your own time, what you read, what you think, what you put in your body is up to you. It's not up to someone else. So you might think, well, then a libertarian certainly would be pro-choice when it comes to abortion. Well, not so fast. Not so fast. Think about it. The libertarian principle is that your freedom ends at the nose of your neighbor. In other words, you can do whatever you like as long as you don't impose upon your neighbor. You can play music on your earphones and play anything you want, but if you turn up your speakers and your neighbor has to listen to it, you can't do that. You can't make your neighbor listen to your music, and you can't pollute your neighbor's air, and you can't pollute your neighbor's water, and you can't mess with your neighbor, take your neighbor's things. So your freedom, although unlimited in the sense of libertarianism when it comes to your own stuff, your own business, has a very strict limit at the nose of your neighbor. Think for a moment here. When you come to abortion, are you not initiating aggression against someone else's nose? There's a nose in there, and that nose develops early on. And I'm not saying the nose is the nexus of abortion. I'm not saying that at all. But certainly what Kermit Gosnell was doing and why we're outraged is he was aggressing against unborn babies, some of whom were just about to be born, and killing them, literally. And he was initiating aggression against a baby that had no threat to him or anyone, and that baby was aggressed against and was coerced. It was killed, and a violent act was perpetrated on that baby. And so he transgressed that line. And so let's reframe the question in terms of aggression rather than group rights or what someone reads in the Bible or something like that. Now, I'm one of those people who loves the Bible, and I'm a Christian, but I can argue the abortion thing without a Bible at all on the principle of aggression. So basically the idea is you cannot aggress against another human being. So begs the question, when is a baby a human being? And everybody would agree, almost everybody would agree, that what Kermit Gosnell was doing was killing human beings. And the court agreed, and the jury agreed, and everybody agrees. So basically we have four choices. A human being becomes a human being at birth. Number 2, at conception. Number 3, at the mother's volition when the mother says so. Number 4, at some point along in the pregnancy. 1, 2, 3, 4, birth, conception, the mother's volition, or at some point during the pregnancy. Now, number 1, a human being becomes a human being at birth is simply not true. If it were true, we'd say, well, whatever Gosnell did was fine. Whatever, if you kill a baby 2 days before it's about to be born, then that's okay. Nobody thinks that, and a tiny, tiny minority of people might think that. But certainly nobody would want to watch it, and nobody would want their children to do that for a living. This is not something we see as morally acceptable. So birth, that cannot be the time when a baby becomes a human being. Well, number two choice, which is held by most of the radical pro-life people, is that life begins at conception. at conception when the egg is fertilized. And so this is actually a point which is probably the most consistent of the four and the most logically plausible. However, it's complicated because there's lots of fertilized eggs that don't attach to the lining of the uterus. And are those babies that die then? Should we have funerals? It's really difficult. Does an IUD cause abortions at a massive level? Do certain birth control pills do the same thing? So it's hard to know exactly. This becomes really tricky at the very earliest moments after conception and into the first few days. It's very, very problematic. So birth, it can't be. Conception is complicated because it's microscopic. It's hard to know what's going on. It's hard to know when this fertilized egg becomes an embryo, becomes a human being, gets a nose, so that your freedom ends at the nose of your neighbor. Number 3, at the mother's volition. De facto, this is what we go with in America right now. When it comes right down to it, if the mother wants it to be a baby, it's a baby. If the mother wants to keep it, then if you shoot the mother, God forbid, you commit a double homicide. And you'd be convicted for that. And so if she wants the baby, that's a baby. Here's the ultrasound. Look at our baby. It's a baby. If the mother doesn't want it, it never was a baby. Now, we go with that in America, but of course, logically, that's absurd. We don't want any person exterior to the person himself or herself making a decision as to his or her personhood. That is morally totally repugnant. We don't want someone else deciding whether or not we're a person. Next thing you know, you have eugenics, you have people getting rid of you have someone else, some third party getting rid of handicapped people, of mentally retarded people, of people who are too old, who cost too much to take care of. Where does that end? We saw that in the first part of the 20th century. We don't want to see that again. So this cannot be true. A person can't be brought into life because the mother wants it to be a baby. So number 1, birth, that can't be true. Otherwise, Gosnell would be fine. Conception, it's morally pretty, it makes a lot of sense, but it's complicated at the beginning. The mother's volition, that cannot certainly impute personhood on a baby. And number 4, at some point along in the pregnancy, at some common sense point. And this is the one that's politically most acceptable, and this is the one that America is moving towards state by state. So Roe versus Wade made abortion legal, and since then, abortion has been made illegal in lots of cases. So state by state, they've been adopting different dates at which abortion is legal. And the 20-week period seems to be one where a lot of states are moving towards. And the idea that before that certain point, pick a date along in the pregnancy, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, whatever it is. And at that point, we'll decide that's a good compromise because it can't be at birth. It can't be the mother's volition. And conception is tricky. So let's pick a point along the way where we can say, well, before that, it's okay to aggress against this being, and after that point, it's not okay to aggress against that being. My guess is this is what we'll come up with in the United States because of political compromises, and most states will settle upon probably first trimester kind of thing. First trimester is okay, second 2 trimesters not so okay, and I think we're going to be doing that. I think that's where it's going to land, which is really unfortunate because it's totally arbitrary. The idea that a baby at 90 days is a baby, and the same being 1 day earlier at 89 days is not, and there's no developmental difference. It just tells us that this isn't right. It's not. It's totally arbitrary. Totally arbitrary. And like many political compromises, it's one of those arbitrary things which people come up with. You're an adult at 18, but you can't drink till you're 21. And you can get a driver's license at 16 because then you're mature enough. Well, we all know that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And when life and death matters like this is really, really important. So the 4 choices I know of are birth, conception, mother's volition, and at some point along the line. And the only one with any logical consistency is conception. Now, this one's problematic too because a fertilized egg and an embryo are 2 different things. And a recognizable human being doesn't happen right away. So it's also, this is very important, unenforceable, totally unenforceable, to say that a baby born at, or a baby is a baby at conception, because of the widespread availability of morning after pills. And there's no way that's going to go away, and there's no way to regulate that. If we were to make morning after pills illegal, people would find a way to get them. There's just absolutely no way with the internet, with mail order, with the kind of things we have right now, that you couldn't get that. You can get any drug in the world on your doorstep in 2 days. Right now, you can, I can. And to enforce that would be impossible. And for libertarians, you don't want to have a law that's unenforceable, because that, like prohibition of alcohol, is impossible to enforce because anybody can make alcohol in their basement. You just can't do that, and because you would need a totalitarian state to regulate it, and we don't want a totalitarian state in a liberty-based free society. So strict conception is unenforceable. It's just the way it is. Strict baby at conception is unenforceable. So what we're going to have to do, I believe, is some real study of earliest childhood development after conception. And we're going to have to look at, in a non-political way, the development of that little cell of 2 and 4 and 8 cells as it multiplies, to the point where it actually becomes a recognizable human being. And as far as we know, brainwaves start very early, as does heartbeat, as does a whole bunch of things, as does the development of a nose. So we need to decide at what point in that cycle that this is a recognizable human being, that any fourth grader looking at it would say that's a human being. And we're going to have to decide at that point that that is going to be the point at which we must, as a society, protect that child, because society has no other obligation, really, than to protect us from aggression and theft. That's the main thing they do. That's why we have governments. And when they stop doing that, we get rid of them. So it's the government's job to protect all citizens, including unborn ones. And we need to make sure that we have a good idea as to where that is. You might say, well, why don't we pick the age of viability when the baby's viable outside the womb? Well, nowadays we are approaching the time where every fertilized egg is viable outside the womb. And that being the case, we need to look at alternatives to abortion. That would be the saving of the baby outside of the mother's womb if the mother doesn't want it. And that would solve the entire abortion problem. If a woman wants to get an abortion, doesn't want to carry the baby, we're approaching the time where we can say, fine, you won't have to carry the baby. We'll take care of the baby, and we will make sure that the baby comes to term, either in an artificial situation or with a mother who is standing in for the mother. So there's ways of doing that also. The other tricky thing is that it'll be really difficult, because the chances are that the age of personhood is probably, or the time of personhood is before the time when most mothers would know that they're pregnant. And so that really does take the choice away from them, and it creates a very difficult moral dilemma in that case too. And to add to that, the idea of rights of women, rights of lots of different groups. Libertarians don't believe in group rights. We believe in human rights, and we put human rights above group rights. We don't like to split people up among men and women, born and unborn, black and white and Latino, whatever that means. Race is a total illusion. We're all mixed race as far as that goes. And we believe in human rights. And the question is, when is a baby a human? Because when a baby is a human, we have an obligation as a society to promise to protect him or her. Well, that's all for today on Life and Liberty Radio. Thanks so much for sharing this part of your spiritual journey with me. Now, the views on this program are not necessarily those of my advertisers, sponsors, places I work or do business with. They're purely my own, but I'm sharing them with you, so share your ideas with me. Write me on Twitter at Liberty House, LIBERTYHOUS, no E. Until next time, let's continue dreaming and working for a free and spiritually grounded society.